She walked into the pharmacy with nothing more than a bottle of cough syrup, but within minutes she was surrounded by flashing lights, cold commands, and the steel bite of handcuffs. Amara wasn't a thief. She wasn't a criminal. She was a nurse, still in scrubs after 12 hours of saving lives. Yet to a clerk and 2 officers, her skin was enough to make her a suspect. That night became more than her story. It became a mirror for all of us, a test of how much injustice we've learned to accept as normal. What happened next would shock everyone, and you won't want to miss a single moment of it. Watch until the very end, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Under the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, the little pharmacy at the edge of the highway looked ordinary, the kind of place no one remembered after they left. But on this night, it would become a stage. Amara stood in line, exhausted from 12 hours in the trauma unit, her scrubs wrinkled, her sneakers damp from disinfectant spills. She carried nothing more dangerous than a bottle of cough syrup and the faint smell of antiseptic clinging to her skin. To anyone who cared to look closely, she was a nurse, a mother, a woman bone-tired from holding strangers' lives together. But to the clerk behind the counter, eyes narrowing with unease, she was something else entirely. "Ma'am," he said, voice tight, "I'm going to need you to step aside." The words hung in the air, not loud but sharp, like glass breaking in slow motion. The man next to the candy display shifted uncomfortably, pretending to study a row of potato chips. A teenage girl near the soda fridge raised her phone, not out of bravery but instinct, the hunger to capture, to record. In her shaky lens, Amara was no longer herself. She was a headline waiting to be written. Amara blinked, confusion flickering across her face. She lifted her wallet, ready to pay. The clerk's hand jerked toward the phone instead, dialing the police with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed this scene before. The teenage girl whispered to her friend, "I think she tried to steal something." The friend frowned, unsure, but didn't argue. Outside, the patrol car appeared almost instantly, tires crunching over wet gravel. Red and blue lights painted the glass in violent rhythm. 2 officers entered with the brisk authority of men who believed they were already in the right. Officer Hale's hand hovered near his holster, though Amara hadn't moved an inch. "Turn around," he barked. "Hands where I can see them." The cough syrup slipped from her grasp, clattering against the floor. The sound echoed louder than it should have, a hollow punctuation. In that pause, in that breathless space, the white man by the chips thought about stepping forward, about saying something, but instead he lowered his gaze. Later, he would tell himself it wasn't his business. The girl with the phone zoomed in. In her frame, Amara's face hardened, fear barely concealed beneath discipline. The girl whispered, "This is gonna blow up online." She didn't realize that what she filmed could destroy a woman's life or save it. Amara's mind raced, but her body stayed still. She remembered her father's warning. There are truths written in law books, and there are truths written on skin. Tonight, only one of those truths mattered. The metal cuffs closed around her wrists with a finality that stole her breath. Someone muttered, "She must have done something." Someone else said nothing at all. The silence of the crowd was louder than any accusation. As they led her toward the squad car, Amara caught her reflection in the store's glass door. For an instant she saw herself doubled on one side, the weary nurse who had held hands slicked with blood hours earlier. On the other, the suspect being marched into the night. Which version of her would the world believe? Which would her son remember? From the back of the patrol car, she glimpsed faces through the window. The white man by the chips stood frozen, guilt gnawing at him. The teenage girl replayed the clip on her phone, excitement and unease colliding in her chest. The clerk adjusted his collar, already preparing the story he would tell. "I did what I thought was right." No one looked her in the eye. The car door slammed shut with a metallic thud. Amara inhaled the sharp tang of vinyl seats, the faint trace of gasoline from the officer's uniform. The city lights blurred as the car pulled away, her wrists aching from steel too tight. She thought of her son, waiting with his bowl of cereal cooling on the table, expecting her footsteps at the door. Her pulse hammered, not just with fear, but with a new, jagged realization. She was no longer simply living her life. She was being watched, dissected, judged by strangers and by systems older than her. And in the quiet hum of the engine, another thought pressed against her chest, terrifying and defiant all at once. This night would not vanish. It would either swallow her whole, or it would set something in motion that none of them could yet see. The patrol car sliced through the wet streets of the city, headlights carving pale tunnels in the mist. Amara sat in the back seat, wrists locked in steel, her chest rising and falling with the quiet fury of someone who knew she was trapped inside a story written centuries before she was born. Every passing block looked different now. Shops and street corners that once felt familiar seemed to sneer at her, as if the whole city was conspiring to remind her she had never truly belonged. Her father's words came back to her, steady and unrelenting. In this country, the map you read in school is not the map you walk. One map says freedom, the other is carved into your skin. She had dismissed it once as an exaggeration, the bitterness of a man scarred by the 60s. Tonight, with cuffs grinding against her wrists, she understood he had only been telling her the truth. Officer Hale drove with the heavy silence of someone who felt no need to explain himself. To him, this was routine. A nurse, a mother, a woman in scrubs, none of it mattered. She was a black woman at the wrong place, at the wrong time. That was enough. His partner, Officer Martinez, younger and less sure, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Their eyes met for a split second. There was hesitation in his gaze, maybe even doubt, but he said nothing. Silence, Amara thought, could be the cruelest weapon of all. Across town, her son Daniel stared at the clock on the kitchen wall, the second hand ticking too loudly in the empty room. His cereal was soggy now, untouched. He pressed his ear toward the door, waiting for the sound of keys in the lock, waiting for the steady rhythm of his mother's voice. Instead, there was a knock. Mrs. Jenkins, their elderly neighbor, stood in the doorway. She looked at Daniel's wide eyes, the fear swelling in them, and she knew instantly. She had seen that look before, on her own children's faces, decades ago, when men in uniforms treated black families like trespassers in their own homes. She put her hand on Daniel's shoulder, whispering a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "Your mama's strong, baby. She'll come back." Back at the pharmacy, the clerk tried to convince himself of his own righteousness. He told another customer, "I did what I thought was right." She looked shifty, kept glancing around. The man frowned. She was wearing scrubs. Scrubs, for God's sake. You think a nurse risks everything for cough syrup? The clerk bristled, defensive. Deep down, he knew the truth, that it wasn't her behavior that had unsettled him. It was her skin, the way her very presence demanded suspicion. He wouldn't say it out loud, but the silence around his guilt told its own story. In a bedroom not far away, the teenage girl replayed the shaky clip she had recorded on her phone. The video showed Amara being cuffed, her face tight with restrained defiance. The girl's fingers trembled as she hovered over the upload button. She told herself it was just for likes, for the adrenaline of being first. Yet when she watched the clip again, she saw something that made her throat tighten. A nurse in scrubs, a mother dragged out under neon lights. Eyes burning with the quiet knowledge that this had happened before, and would happen again. The girl didn't have the words for it yet, but she felt it, the wrongness, the weight. She pressed upload anyway. In the patrol car, Amara shifted against the vinyl seat, the smell of gasoline heavy in the air. She wanted to scream her truth, to force them to see her not as a suspect, but as a woman who had spent the last 12 hours mending broken bodies. But she knew screams could be twisted into threats. Dignity was her last defense, and she clung to it like armor. Then Hale spoke, voice flat and practiced. "They're all the same." The words hit harder than the cuffs. Not because they were new, but because they were old, so old they carried her mother's tears, her father's battles in court, her grandmother's whispered prayers for safety. This wasn't Hale's prejudice alone. It was the system speaking through him, a system that never tired of repeating itself. Martinez shifted uncomfortably. His lips parted as if to object, but he swallowed the words, pressing them back down into silence. Amara caught the hesitation and felt a flicker of bitter recognition. Even those who saw the truth often chose the safety of silence. When the car pulled into the precinct, drizzle slicked the air, the building looming like a fortress of bureaucracy. The heavy doors waited to swallow her whole. As Hale led her out, heads turned. Officers at the desk barely glanced at her, already fitting her into a script. Another suspect, another body in the system. Amara straightened her spine despite the ache in her wrists. She thought of Daniel's face, of Mrs. Jenkins' weary hands on his shoulders, of the girl holding her phone with trembling fingers. She thought of the clerk's uneasy lies and the man who hadn't spoken up by the chips. Every one of them was now part of this story, whether they wanted to be or not. This night wasn't just hers. It belonged to all of them, to the city itself, to the long shadow of a country still chained to its history. And as the iron doors slammed behind her, Amara whispered a vow into the echoing corridor. This will not end here. Not this time. By the time the sun rose, Amara's face was everywhere. On TV screens above diners serving pancakes and bacon, on cell phones clutched by commuters on the subway, on the endless scroll of social media feeds. The video was short, barely a minute, but it carried the weight of centuries. A nurse in scrubs, wrists bound in steel, was led into the night under the flashing lights of a patrol car. By noon, two nations had formed. On one side, people who saw Amara as a victim of an old wound America refused to heal. On the other hand, those who insisted the police had done their job. Commentators on morning shows sharpened their voices. We don't know the full story. She looked defiant. Why was she out so late? The words bled into living rooms, into coffee shops, into the minds of millions who had never met her yet felt entitled to judge her. At the kitchen table, Daniel pressed his small fists against his eyes. He had watched the clip a dozen times, each replay carving the humiliation deeper. Mrs. Jenkins tried to turn the phone away, whispering that his mother was strong, that she would come home. But Daniel's young mind had already absorbed what the world was teaching him, that his mother's skin could make her guilty no matter what she had done. In Washington, a congressman seized the moment. He went live on cable news declaring, "This is the chaos you get when people disrespect authority." His words were met with applause from some, outrage from others. Within hours, activists called for a rally. The clip had escaped the internet and entered the bloodstream of politics. Back at the pharmacy, reporters swarmed the parking lot, shoving microphones at the clerk who had made the call. His story wavered under the spotlight. She seemed suspicious, he stammered. She kept looking around. A journalist pressed harder. Suspicious how? The clerk's cheeks flushed. He couldn't say it out loud, but everyone watching knew. Suspicious because she was black. The teenage girl who had filmed the arrest sat frozen in her room, scrolling through thousands of comments under her video. Some praised her as a hero. Others blamed her for ruining a man's career. She hadn't expected this. At school, her classmates stared at her like she carried a secret she hadn't asked for. She replayed the video over and over, drawn not to the handcuffs but to Amara's eyes, steady, burning, almost as if she were staring straight through the screen, demanding accountability from whoever watched. Outside the precinct, the air crackled with tension. Hundreds gathered, holding handmade signs. "Nurse, not criminal. We see you, Amara." Their chants echoed against the walls, a chorus of defiance. But across the street, another group had assembled, flags waving, signs declaring back the blue, their voices sharp and mocking. Between them, a row of officers stood shoulder to shoulder, shields gleaming under the streetlights. Reporters captured the standoff, their cameras hungry for conflict. On one channel, footage of protesters kneeling with raised hands. On another, a commentator called them agitators. At night, tear gas hissed into the crowd, and the image of a mother clutching her coughing child flashed across the news. The country split further, each side retreating into its certainty. Inside her cell, Amara heard the muffled roar from outside, felt it in the floor beneath her feet. She didn't know how many people were chanting her name, but she knew their voices carried more than her story. They carried the weight of every black woman accused before her, every man stopped on a back road, every child taught to fear the police who were supposed to protect them. Officer Martinez scrolled through his phone in the locker room, the viral clip playing again and again. He saw the hashtags, the outrage, the protests outside. He thought of what Hale had said in the car. They're all the same. He wanted to argue. to say that Amara hadn't done a thing wrong. But he had swallowed the words then, and he swallowed them now. Silence pressed against his chest like a stone. Hale, meanwhile, gave a statement to the press. We followed procedure. We neutralized a potential threat. The phrase potential threat, replayed on the news, stripped of context, polished into justification. But for those who knew better, it was the oldest excuse in America. Potential threat. Words used to explain why black lives ended too soon, why dignity was stolen in the name of order. By evening, the clip had reached the highest offices of the Justice Department. Civil rights lawyers pored over it, noting every frame, every movement. This isn't just about her, one said. This is about a system. And still, in living rooms across the country, families argued over dinner. One neighbor insisted Amara must have done something wrong. Another shook his head, saying he saw his own daughter in her, exhausted in scrubs, just trying to get home. America was split in two, staring at the same clip and seeing two different truths. In her cell, Amara sat on the narrow bench, the air heavy with disinfectant. She had not seen the video. She did not know that strangers carried her face on signs, that chants filled the night outside, that politicians had already turned her humiliation into ammunition. She only knew the weight of silence, the sting of steel at her wrists, and the certainty that what had happened to her was larger than herself. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Silence cannot last forever. One day, the storm breaks. Amara closed her eyes, breathed deep, and whispered into the stale air. Let it break. Let it break now. The courthouse pulsed like a living heart, every corridor vibrating with tension. Outside, the crowd had doubled overnight. Drums pounded, voices thundered, cardboard signs waved in a sea of fists. Justice for Amara echoed against the stone steps, rising like a hymn. Across the barricades, another group stood their ground, waving flags and chanting, "Back the blue." Between them, riot police braced, helmets gleaming under a bruised gray sky. America's fracture line ran straight through Main Street. Inside, the air was no less charged. Reporters filled every row, pens scratching, cameras blinking. One of them, a young white journalist named Claire, felt her throat tighten. She had covered politics before press releases, staged debates, but never this. As she adjusted her recorder, she realized with a jolt, history wasn't just something you reported. Sometimes it sat breathing in the same room, daring you to tell the truth. Amara sat at the defense table, her blouse plain, her wrists free of steel but marked with faint red grooves. She looked neither broken nor triumphant, only steady. In her silence, she carried the weight of those who had walked this path before her. Officer Hale took the stand first. His jaw was rigid, his tone crisp. The suspect was uncooperative. She posed a potential threat. The words rolled out with bureaucratic precision, polished and practiced. In the gallery, a woman named Patricia, a black mother who had buried her son after a routine stop, bit her lip until it bled. She had heard those words before, potential threat. The phrase had been the last thing standing between her boy's innocence and his coffin. Then came the lawyer's voice, calm, deliberate, cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Your Honor, we submit the unedited body cam footage. The screen flickered. The room hushed. The footage began. Amara standing still, hands visible, voice soft. I'm a nurse. I just finished my shift. Then came the phrase that cracked the air open like thunder. Hale's muttered words, low but clear. You people are always hiding something. The gallery gasped. The sound was raw, unrestrained. Claire, the journalist, felt her stomach twist. She had written about bias in statistics in studies in abstract terms. But to hear it, to see it spill into reality with such casual venom, made the ink on her notepad blur. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just chronicling injustice, she was complicit if she failed to name it for what it was. At the back of the courtroom, Martinez shifted in his seat, his palms slick with sweat. He had been there. He had heard those words in the car. Now the world had heard them too. His uniform suddenly felt heavier, as though each stitched thread whispered, "Which side are you on?" The The footage ended. Silence followed, thick as smoke. Hale's lawyer scrambled to object, to talk about context and stress, but the words collapsed under the weight of the recording. In the gallery, Patricia's tears finally fell. She gripped her neighbor's hand, whispering, "If only they had recorded my boy. If only." Outside, the crowd surged as news broke. Body cam reveals racial slur. The chant shifted, louder now, fiercer. "We see you. We hear you. We are you." Riot police pressed forward, shields raised. A canister hissed. Tear gas billowed into the air, curling through banners, choking throats. A teenager in the front line fell to his knees, coughing, while his mother pulled him back with trembling arms. Inside, the judge's gavel pounded for order, but the sound was drowned by the roar outside. Amara sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Hale. For the first time, she saw a flicker in his expression, not shame, not remorse, but the cracking of certainty. He realized the system's shield had slipped. Claire raised her recorder, her voice unsteady as she whispered into it. "The room has changed. You can feel it. The lie has cracked open. America is watching." She knew her editors might soften her words, spin the headline, but she vowed then that her story would not flinch. Daniel sat in the gallery, his small frame taut with hope and fury. He gripped Mrs. Jenkins's hand, whispering, "They have to believe her now. They have to." For the first time since that night, he let himself imagine his mother walking free. The gavel struck again, echoing like gunfire. The judge adjourned the session. But as people filed out, no one felt it was truly over. The footage had not closed the story, it had detonated it. The crowd outside grew louder, the police line harder, the fault lines deeper. Amara rose slowly. She didn't smile, she didn't weep. She simply lifted her chin, eyes forward. Her presence a declaration. She was still here, and the truth could no longer be unseen. The city woke to the sound of helicopters. Their blades carved the morning sky, circling above streets already flooded with people. From every direction, crowds poured in. Teachers with handmade signs, veterans in faded uniforms, mothers carrying photographs of their lost children. The courthouse steps had become a battleground, not of fists and bullets, but of voices raw, relentless, colliding. "Justice for Amara," thundered one side. "Protect the badge," roared the other. Police in riot gear stood like statues between them, their shields gleaming, their batons ready. Reporters perched on vans, microphones trembling in the roar. America's fracture was no longer a metaphor. It was alive, bleeding, and loud enough to rattle glass. Inside, the hearing resumed. The tension was thick, like air before a storm. Amara sat upright, her face calm but eyes burning. Daniel, seated between neighbors, clutched a photo he had drawn, his mother with her hands free, a small son above her head. The child's hope clashed with the adult's dread because everyone knew freedom was never just freedom in this country. It was bargaining, it was a struggle, it was survival. The defense lawyer rose. "This is not just about my client, this is about a system that feeds on silence. Today we ask this court and this country not only to dismiss false charges, but to enshrine justice into law." He lifted a thick stack of papers, the Amara bill. Gasps rustled through the gallery. The words sounded too ambitious, too impossible. Yet outside, chants grew louder, as though the people had already memorized the phrase before it was born. From the back, Patricia, the mother who had buried her son, leaned forward. Tears welled in her eyes, not just for Amara, but for every child stolen before body cams, before protests, before hashtags. She whispered, "Don't let them bury this bill the way they buried him." Across the aisle sat a congressman from a district far away. He wasn't known for courage, but last night his office phones had exploded with calls, his inbox flooded with pleas. Now, as cameras flashed, he realized history had cornered him. If he chose silence, silence would define him. The judge struck his gavel. "This court finds the charges against Amara Cole baseless. They are hereby dismissed with prejudice." The gallery erupted. Cheers and sobs collided. Amara closed her eyes, inhaling the taste of freedom. Daniel's cry, half laughter, half sob, echoed through the hall. Mama's coming home. Yet even in triumph, danger lurked, because outside the announcement hit the crowd like fire on dry grass. Protesters cheered, tears streaming. Counter-protesters jeered, their chants turning uglier, harder, laced with rage. A glass bottle shattered against a shield. Tear gas hissed. Mothers pulled children back. Reporters ducked, their cameras shaking. Claire, the journalist, kept her mic raised. The dismissal has ignited the streets. What began as a trial is now a national confrontation. The question isn't just about Amara anymore, it's about America. She felt her throat tighten but pressed on. This was no longer just a career assignment. It was a test of courage. In a diner miles away, a white mechanic named Bill watched the coverage on a flickering TV. He'd never joined a protest, never read a bill. But as Hale's slur replayed on the footage, he felt something twist inside him. For the first time, he admitted aloud to his wife, they don't treat them the way they treat us. And we've been pretending not to see it. His words hung heavy in the kitchen, decades late, but dangerous in their honesty. Back at the courthouse, Amara walked out, sunlight spilling across her face. The crowd parted, voices roaring her name. For one fleeting moment, she felt like more than herself, like a vessel carrying centuries of pain and centuries of defiance. But on the edge of the crowd, Officer Martinez stood frozen, still in uniform. He had testified, yes, but now his brothers in blue eyed him with suspicion. His oath to the badge clashed with his oath to truth. He knew tonight his locker might be emptied, his career over. Yet when Daniel's eyes found him in the crowd, Martinez gave the boy a single nod, a silent vow. I chose the truth, and I would choose it again. Across town, Hale sat alone in his kitchen, his badge discarded on the table, headlines flashing his name like a scarlet letter. He whispered to no one. I followed procedure. But the lie had cracked open, and he could hear the echo of his own words. You people like a curse that refused to die. That night, Congress debated the Amara bill. On the floor, some shouted about chaos, others about justice. In living rooms across America, families argued, friendships frayed. The nation was not united, but it was awake. And outside the Capitol, thousands lit candles. Their flames wavered against the night, fragile but stubborn. A chorus rose, fierce and unyielding. No justice, no peace. Justice for Amara, justice for all. Amara, sitting with Daniel in her small living room, watched the coverage. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply whispered to her son, we're not done. But tonight, we breathe. The marble halls of Congress pulsed with a fever that night, though the air outside was sharper, charged with the weight of history. Protesters lit the lawn like a river of fire, their candles swaying in rhythm with chants that rolled like thunder. Pass the bill, pass the bill. The sound clawed its way through the thick stone walls until even the chandeliers trembled. Inside, the chamber boiled. On one side, lawmakers thundered warnings of chaos. On the other hand, voices rose for justice long denied. It was less a debate than a trial of the American soul. Congressman Doyle stood first, his words ringing with conviction. This bill tears at the foundation of law enforcement. You cannot gut the men and women who protect us without consequence. You think you'll save lives? You'll cost them. His speech was clipped into sound bites before his seat was warm again, replayed on screens across the nation. Protect the badge, protect the nation. But Congresswoman Reed rose in reply, her face flushed, her voice steady. Consequences. The only consequence I see is burying another child. This bill does not weaken America, it strengthens it, because a nation that excuses bias rots from the inside out. The chamber roared, the gallery erupting in applause and boos alike. From the press box, Claire scribbled fast. But tonight she wrote more than a reporter. She wrote as someone watching a country argue with its reflection. Her draft began, this bill is not policy. It is a mirror. What terrifies some is not the text, it is their own face staring back. High above, on the balcony, Officer Martinez sat stiffly, his hands clenched, his eyes trained on the floor below. Reporters had swarmed him earlier, hungry for quotes. Now he spoke only to himself. I took an oath to the law, not to lies. He knew the words would never make the record, but his silence weighed heavier than speeches. Across town, in a dimly lit library, Professor Ellis, a historian with decades of books behind him, watched the session live. He spoke softly into a recorder meant for his students. Moments like this are deceptively fragile. History tells us that nations rarely fracture in silence. They fracture when truth grows too loud to ignore. Tonight is loud. Back on the floor, deals crept like shadows. A senator's aide slipped notes promising campaign funds if a vote swung red. A lobbyist whispered threats about donor withdrawals. But out on the lawn, Patricia stood among the crowd, her son's photograph pinned to her chest. She felt none of the whispers, only the chants, only the heat of wax dripping onto her hand. Stay lit, she told her candle. Stay lit. The hours dragged. Shouts cracked through the chamber. Gavels splintered the air. Two congressmen nearly lunged at each other before being restrained. Outside, the crowd pressed against barricades, chanting louder, harder, as if their voices alone could carry through marble and shift the vote. And still, in kitchens across America, families argued. Bill the mechanic watched from his recliner, his teenage daughter beside him. They're tearing this country apart, he muttered. But the girl shook her head. No, Dad. They're trying to put it back together. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not agreement, not reconciliation, but recognition. At 2:13 a.m., the board lit up for the vote. Each name glowed green or red, each second an eternity. The nation held its breath. Outside, the chants stilled, a hush falling over thousands. Then it was done. By 3 votes, the Amara bill passed the House. The chamber exploded cheers, curses, tears colliding like storm waves. On the lawn, cries rose into the night, a sea of voices breaking into sobs and songs. Patricia fell to her knees, candles still flickering. Claire typed with shaking hands. Tonight, America chose to face itself, if only for a moment. Yet the victory felt precarious. Already, senators vowed to block it. Police unions threatened strikes. Governors warned of rebellion. And in Hale's kitchen, the disgraced officer sat with his badge on the counter, whispering, "It won't last. They'll bury it." His voice was low, almost hopeful. Back in her living room, Amara held Daniel close as the news played. Neighbors gathered outside her window, their candles joining a constellation of fire. She whispered to her son, "This is not the end. This is the start of a fight bigger than us both." Professor Ellis clicked off his recorder. He stared out the window at the city below, where chants still rose into the night. "History is watching," he said softly, "and history does not forgive silence." The flames outside flickered against the darkness, fragile but defiant. For one night at least, America burned with the possibility of becoming something truer than its past. The night after the vote, the city held its breath. Candles flickered along the sidewalks, rivers of wax tracing prayers onto cracked pavement. No chants now, no helicopters, only the faint hum of a nation too restless to sleep. Inside a modest kitchen, Amara sat with Daniel, nestled against her arm. His breathing was steady, his hand gripping her sleeve as if she might vanish again. She smoothed his hair and whispered, "We made it home, baby. But tomorrow the fight will still be here." Her words were soft, but each syllable carried the weight of generations. Across town, Patricia returned her son's photograph to the mantel. The bill would not bring him back, but it carved his absence into history, where it could no longer be ignored. He whispered, "They finally saw you." For the first time, she allowed a fragile smile. In the precinct, the locker room was thick with anger. Lockers slammed, voices spat curses. "They've tied our hands," one officer growled. "Next time we hesitate, we die." Resentment curdled in the air. For them, the bill wasn't justice, it was betrayal. Meanwhile, in a small-town diner miles away, Bill the mechanic stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the television. His daughter replayed clips of the debate on her phone. her face bright with hope. Bill shook his head. "It's never that simple," he muttered. But he didn't switch off the screen. For the first time, he let the words sink in. Far above the noise, Professor Ellis spoke softly into a recorder. "This vote will not be remembered as closure. It will be remembered as exposure. The fracture is no longer hidden. What we do with it, that is the test." His voice was calm, almost clinical, but laced with warning. And Hale? He sat in his darkened living room, the badge tossed aside, whiskey trembling in his hand. His name was a headline, his voice a curse replayed on every screen. "They don't know what it's like out there," he muttered to no one. But deep down, he wondered if it was he who had never known. As night deepened, neighbors gathered outside Amara's home. They brought flowers, held candles, their light painting the street in gold. Amara stepped onto the porch, Daniel's hand in hers. Silence fell. Then her voice, steady but tender. "This bill is not the end. It is a beginning. My freedom means nothing if another mother buries her child tomorrow. We are not finished, but tonight we breathe." The crowd erupted, their voices rising in a chorus that carried across the city, across the nation. Justice for all. Justice for all. Tears streamed, arms lifted, candles waved like stars refusing to dim. For a moment, strangers became kin, bound by defiance, bound by hope. In living rooms, on buses, in kitchens, Americans leaned closer to their screens. Some nodded, some cursed, some wept, but none could look away. Professor Ellis closed his recorder with a final note. History does not move in straight lines. It stumbles, it bleeds, it resists. Tonight, it stumbled forward, but the ground is still breaking beneath us. The camera panned across the street of candles, each flame small, fragile, but fierce against the dark. And then Amara lifted her face to the night sky. For the first time since the steel cuffs bit her wrists, she let herself believe not in certainty, but in possibility. The screen faded to black, the chant still echoing. Justice for all. Justice for all. Underneath the fluorescent lights of that small pharmacy, what unfolded was not just the humiliation of one woman, it was the unveiling of a system that still breathes inequality into the very air we walk through. Amara's story is not fiction in the deepest sense. It's a mirror, polished enough to reflect the silence of bystanders, the instinctive suspicion cast upon a black woman in scrubs, the casual words of an officer who believed his prejudice was procedure. And in that mirror, every one of us must decide whether we are the silent man by the chips, the teenager with a phone chasing clicks, or the voice that dares to interrupt injustice before it hardens into truth. The lesson here is painfully simple, yet profoundly urgent. Injustice does not always come with a raised fist or shouted insult. More often, it comes dressed as routine, as suspicion that is never explained, as silence that chooses comfort over courage. What shocked the world about Amara's ordeal was not only what was done to her, but how ordinary it seemed to those who carried it out. That ordinariness is the real danger. It tells us that injustice has learned to hide in plain sight. But Amara's vow to not let this end in silence is the part of the story we must all carry with us. It reminds us that change does not happen because truth is whispered. It happens when truth is shouted, recorded, defended, and lived out loud. The people outside that courthouse, the ones who lifted signs, lit candles, and raised their voices, understood this, that justice is not a gift, it is a demand. So what does this mean for you, for me, for us? It means asking ourselves whether we will let silence speak for us, or whether we will use our voices at work, in our neighborhoods, at the ballot box, in uncomfortable conversations. It means looking at Amara not as a symbol to pity, but as a fellow human being whose dignity demands that we question the systems around us. And perhaps most importantly, it means remembering that the story didn't end with her walking free. It won't end until no child grows up learning that their mother's skin makes her guilty before she speaks. That is the unfinished work, the baton passed to us by generations who whispered in prayer, marched in the streets, and refused to be unseen. If this story stirred something in you, let it be more than a passing thought. Share it, discuss it, question it, because silence is the soil where prejudice grows. but conversation and action are the roots of change. And if you want more stories like this, stories that challenge, that heal, subscribe to our channel, and watch the other videos we've created. Each one carries its own lesson, its own heartbeat of truth. Thank you for watching. May it not end with the closing of this video, but continue in the choices you make, in the words you speak, in the courage you carry. And as you step into your day, may you walk with clarity, compassion, and the quiet but unyielding strength to say, "This will not end here."